My father was a member of the American Railway Union that was organized by Debs. When I was about 9 or 10 years of age, my father, for some reason, possibly to get his watch inspected, he was away from his work, and I was with him on the street, in Main Street of the city, when we met Gene. And at that time, he showed an interest in me. He caressed me and talked to me and made such a profound impression upon me that I loved him from that moment. I had the rare good fortune of being in his company many hours. In this way, I came to learn quite a bit about Gene's philosophy and about some of the things that happened to him during his progress through organized labor and politics and so forth. In the history of the United States, only half a dozen people stand out as great leaders, great humanitarians. And I think Debs should be so recognized as one of the great, humane, lovable people that's come into the world. I'm going to read the words that Gene wrote and spoke in his lifetime. The years following the Civil War marked an era of extraordinary industrial and commercial activity. Manufacturing developed at an enormous rate. The railroads were penetrating the Great West, and the population spread over the vast domain. I had served my apprenticeship in the railroad shops, and being the only cub at the time, I knew what it was to have a dozen bosses at once and all the grievances I could carry without spilling. Later, as a locomotive fireman, I learned the hardships of the rail in snow, sleet, and hail, of the dangers along the iron highway, the uncertainty of employment and scant wages. As a wage worker, I came to realize the oppressions and suffering of the working class and to understand something of the labor question. On February the 27th, 1875, I first joined a labor union. The local lodge of the Brotherhood of Locomotive Firemen was organized at Terre Haute, Indiana, and I was admitted as a charter member and chosen secretary. first step was taken in organized labor, and a new influence changed the whole current of my career. I was filled with enthusiasm. The blood leapt in my veins. Day and night, I worked for the Brotherhood. To attend a meeting was my supreme joy, and for 10 years I was not once absent. Then came the symptoms of congestion, the glutted markets, the clogging of productive machinery. Factories and workshops closed down. The country swarmed with unemployed working men. The railroads reduced wages and discharged thousands. Discontent was brewing, and strikes were threatened by the idle workers. The trade union movement had organized during the years of industrial prosperity, and when the panic came, the strikes followed in rapid order. In July 1877, the railroad strike spread rapidly and were fired by violence in most of the railroad centers. The Pittsburgh riots were the most disastrous in the loss of life and destruction of property. The strikes were finally crushed and the leaders driven out and blacklisted. The loss of the strike was a staggering blow to organized labor. The mere suspicion of belonging to a union was sufficient grounds for instant discharge. And so I was spurred on in the work of organizing. My grip was always packed, and I was darting in all directions. To tramp through a railroad yard in the rain, snow, or sleet till daybreak, to be ordered out of a roundhouse for being an agitator, or put off a train were all in the program. On May 1st, 1886, the general strikes for the 8-hour day broke out in various parts of the country. The murderous assaults upon peaceful meetings and the brutal clubbing of orderly working men by the police of Chicago culminated on May the 4th, 1886, in the Haymarket riots at Chicago. The outrageous execution of the anarchists on November the 11th of the following year was a fiendish plot to silence the agitation and crush the movement for an 8-hour workday. In 1888, a strike occurred on the Burlington system involving all of its engineers and firemen and some of its brakemen and switchmen. At last, the strikers were exhausted and compelled to yield to total defeat. Thus it was proved by the loss of another great railroad strike, not one of which was ever won by the Brotherhoods, that when the supreme test of strength comes, the railway unions are always crushed by the railway corporations. The defeat of this and other strikes led to the organization of the American Railway Union in 1893, which embraced all the employees in the railway service. I was bent on thorough and complete organization of the railroad men, not the firemen merely, but the brakemen, switchmen, telegraphers, shopmen, track hands, and all of them. And all my time and energy were given to that end. At this time, thousands were pouring into the Union all over the country. In April 1894, the strike on the Great Northern, involving all the employees of the entire system, was fought. It resulted in a complete victory for the Union in less than 3 weeks. At that period in our history, there were hundreds of company towns scattered around over the country. Pullman had created such a town just outside of Chicago. He owned all the houses in this town. He owned the church. He owned the library. Every building in it belonged to Pullman. He owned the store where their purchases were made. And again, the prices of commodities were higher in Pullman Town than they were outside of Pullman Town. Yet his employees were forced to live in Pullman Town and to retain their employment. Along with this situation came wage cuts and layoffs that brought people to absolute hunger. And it was under these conditions that the Pullman employees decided to strike. Now, they had been admitted to the American Railway Union because they were a part of the railroad employees. They made the Pullman cars. And so they asked the support of the rest of the members of the American Railway Union. In the month of May, I visited Pullman in person. I could not believe the reports I had heard of the conditions of the men and women who labored there. The employees of the Pullman Company did not want to strike. They appointed a committee and called on the officials of Chicago, and Mr. Pullman happened to be there. The very next morning, the committee was discharged. That day, every man, woman, and child withdrew from the service of the company. The Pullman Company, backed by the combined railway corporations, resolved to crush the Union. They had the United States Marshal of Illinois swear in an army of deputies. These deputies consisted of thieves, thugs, the worst element that had ever been turned loose on any city. As soon as the deputies began to operate, the trouble began. Old hulks of cars were fired, alarm bells tolled, the press volleyed and thundered, and all the wires sped the news that Chicago's throat was in the clutch of a red mob. Grover Cleveland forced federal troops into the state for the sole purpose of aiding the corporations to crush the union and defeat the strike. Injunctions flew thick and fast. I and the other leaders of the strike were arrested without charges and jailed without trial. The Chicago jail sentences were followed by 6 months at Woodstock jail. I had time to think. There is something wrong in this country. The judicial nets are so adjusted as to catch the minnows and let the whales slip through. For 2 years after the Pullman strike, I was shadowed by railroad detectives. We tried organizing in secret. It would not work. And I began to read and think and dissect the anatomy of the system in which working men, no matter how organized, could be shattered, battered, splintered at a single stroke. Now I ask this question, and it applies to the whole field of industry. If 100 workers work in a mine and produce 100 tons of coal, how much of that coal are they entitled to? Are they not entitled to all of it? If the worker who produces wealth is not entitled to it, who is? To the worker in particular, it is important to know what socialism is and what it means. Socialism is a political movement of the working class which aims at the abolition of individual ownership of the natural wealth of the world, the soil, the mines, the inventions and creations of industry. Workers are beginning to think, and they will soon begin to act. They will not beg for their rights, they will take them. Marx expressed it half a century ago. He said, "You have a world to gain and nothing to lose but your chains." Debs was unlike any other speaker that I ever heard. Most of the speakers of the day were actors. They went through all kinds of motions, indicating every emotion that they were trying to put over to their audience. If they were shedding tears, their head would droop and they would go into a depressed position on the stage and so on. Gene had none of this mannerism. his words flowed, and yet there was sufficient pause or time between each word that you could understand that word, you could comprehend its meaning. When he would walk forward to the limit of the stage and stretch out his hands, you felt you were brought near to him. He didn't go into histrionics, he didn't do any acting, he was just himself. It is infinitely better to help than to hurt, to relieve than it is to oppress. But in this system, we have so little choice. Millions of workers, men, women, and children, have to fight each other for a chance to work and exist. And the most of them pass away in age without having known for a single hour the real joy of life. In the capitalist society, the wage worker is bought in the open market the same as hair, hide, salt, or any other form of merchandise. When the capitalist needs you as a worker to operate his machine, he does not call for men, but for hands. And when you see a placard posted, 50 hands wanted, you stop on the instant. You know that he means you. Workers produce in great abundance, not for themselves, however, for they no longer own the tools they work with. What they produce belongs to the capitalist class, who owns the tools with which they work. The fact that they own the tools with which you work accounts for their having the power to decide whether you shall work or not. You are at their mercy, as long as the tools are privately owned by the capitalists. The campaign of the Socialist Party is and will be wholly educational, to arouse the consciousness of the workers to their economic interests as a class, to develop their capacity for clear thinking, to achieve their solidarity industrially and politically. In the United States, we are approaching the third revolution. The first destroyed the divine right of kings to rule and gave the colonies their independence. The second abolished chattel slavery and destroyed the right of property in human flesh. It is the historic mission of the third to wipe out the capitalist system and emancipate the working class. The Socialist Party, when I joined it, had all kinds of people in it. Most of the members of the Socialist Party knew very little about Marxian socialism. They came in for various reasons. Most of them came in because they read Bellamy's Looking Backward or some utopian dream had implanted itself in their mind, and they thought it could be realized in the Socialist Party. There were ministers who felt that socialism would make it possible to practice the Christian ethic in everyday living. Many of the teachers that came into the movement thought by contact with the working people they could elevate their standards of culture. And of course the working people joined because at that time they were class conscious. These battles that took place between the militia and the workers were very instructive in making them aware of the two classes, that one class controlled the government and all of the power of the government through the police authorities, through the militia, and through the federal troops. One fellow put it, he said, when a policeman's club comes down on your head, it's a very educative experience. And so the police club came down on many a head, and it resulted in a very quick awareness of the fact that there was classes and that one class exploited the other. The industrial workers of the world is organized not to conciliate, but to fight the capitalist class. We deny that there is anything in common between workers and capitalists. The working class can only be unionized efficiently along class lines. Socialists are not on the alert for some mythical Moses to lead them into a fabled promised land. They know that persons have deceived them and will again. So they put their trust in principles, knowing that these will not betray them. They have made up their minds to be their own leaders and to save themselves. The labor question, which is really the question of all humanity, will never be solved until it is solved by the working class. It will never be solved for you by capitalists. It will never be solved for you by politicians. It will remain unsolved until you yourselves solve it. In the beginning, the capitalists in the United States were happy to sell munitions and supplies to both Germany and Great Britain. But the U-boats were so effective in sinking ships that it was impossible to get goods into England, and England had bottled up the German fleet so completely and created such a blockade situation that it was impossible to sell supplies to Germany. So in this situation, in order to keep the goods flowing, our sympathies begin to change and go from that of being neutrals to becoming allies with Great Britain and France. And in this situation, to protect our investments, or the investments of capitalists in the manufacture of war supplies, it was necessary to provide an armed escort to these ships. The great modern nations are capitalistic nations. They all take from their workers what they produce, and they have got to force it onto other nations. We have got to be prepared to force the surplus that we have taken from the workers upon the people of other nations. That is why we need an international market. That is why we must have a standing army. It is one thing to fight for your country, and another thing to fight for Rockefeller's oil derricks. You never had a country to fight for, and never will have as much as an inch of one, as long as you're fool enough to make a target of your bodies for the profit and glory of your masters. I am not a capitalist soldier. I am opposed to every war but one. I am for that war, heart and soul. That is the worldwide war of the social revolution. My comrades, our hearts are with the Bolsheviks of Russia. The Russian Revolution under the leadership of Lenin and Trotsky is the historic beginning of the international revolution destined to sweep capitalism from the face of the earth. So far as the Russian proletariat is concerned, the day of the people has arrived. In June of 1918, I was arrested for a speech that I had delivered in Canton, Ohio. The judge sentenced me to 10 years in West Virginia State Penitentiary. The government transferred me to its own federal prison at Atlanta on June 13, 1990. At the time I entered prison, persecution from without had wrecked many of its locals and decimated membership. But the Socialist Party was still intact until the convention was held 4 months later, which split the party and its membership into several conflicting and hostile factions. I admit the party has made mistakes, and that it is not today what I should like to see. But the same would be true of any other party I might join. When the time came for making the nomination for president in 1920, I was serving my sentence in Atlanta prison. I yielded to the wishes of the delegates in the convention held in New York City. The demonstration that occurred upon my leaving the prison at Atlanta will abide with me till the last hour of my life. It was Christmas Day. The order for my release had come at last. For nearly 3 years I had been the daily associate and companion of those souls. I had shared with them on equal terms in all things, and they loved me as I loved them. But the parting and the uncertainty of never meeting again struck our hearts with sorrow and regret. I felt as if I was deserting my friends, and a sense of guilt gripped my conscience. The guard simply opened the steel door in front of the signal from the warden. My brother Theodore had arrived to join me for the homeward journey. I was soon to greet my eager, long-waiting friends and comrades. Midway in the reservation, we were halted by what seemed a rumbling of the earth. It was a roar of voices, the hoarse voices of the caged human host, who gave vent to their long pent-up emotions in thunder volleys I never heard before and never shall again. My heart almost ceased to beat. I felt myself overwhelmed with pain and saddening emotions. As I stepped into the waiting car, another mighty shout was heard, and then another and another, until far, far up the winding road and far away from the terrible prison, the last faint echo from the convicts that wept as they cheered died away in the distance. I have arrived at the conclusion that my place in the future, as in the past, is in the Socialist Party. If the Socialist Party is not the revolutionary party it should be, it can be made so. To work, comrades, we have a party to rebuild, a press to restore in the service of the working class, there's room and need for us all. The aristocrats who rule flatter themselves that their system will endure for all time. But underlying human society, there are great economic forces unceasing in operation, that in certain points in their development, these forces outgrow the forces that contain them, and society is riven asunder, and a new system comes into existence. It is possible for me to see a system of society in which there is no upper class and no lower class. We are not going to exchange places with the capitalist and put him in the lower class. They may not know it. They may put us in jail. I am notifying them that their great-grandchildren will plant flowers where we sleep.